Breaking developments coming in. China's President Xi Jinping has met Kim Jong-un for the second time is the latest that we are gathering. China's President Xi Jinping met with the North Korean leader. The meeting took place in northern China is the initial information that's trickling in. This is a huge moment when the Chinese leader has met his North Korean counterpart. This, remember, is the second meeting that's taking place between the two leaders. The earlier one took place when Kim Jong-un, in the run-up to his meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, had traveled all the way to Beijing to meet the Chinese leader. This is the second meeting that's taking place also at a critical time. This is right before Kim Jong-un's scheduled meeting, which is to take place with US President Donald Trump. Let's get in further perspectives from our senior correspondent, Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining us from the newsroom. Ramesh, a second meeting. This again coming in at a crucial time. This is right before Kim Jong-un meets in just a few weeks from now with US President Donald Trump. But what's different this time around in this meeting as compared to the earlier one that the two leaders had was that there is not too much secrecy, at least. There are images coming in of the meeting that's taking place.
Indeed, Molly, this is as surprising as Kim Jong-un's first visit to Beijing in the last week of April. Remember, that was his first visit abroad since coming to power in 2011 after the death of his father, Kim Jong-il. So this meeting, we're given to understand, is a second visit to China in less than 2 months. And this happened yesterday and today. And we saw those visuals of him shaking hands and talking to Xi Jinping of China. And now they met in Dalian in the northeastern city of China, unlike the previous visit when he traveled all the way to Beijing. So clearly, this goes to show that China and North Korea heavily invested in each other's efforts for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And that only goes to show that China remains as involved as ever in the affairs on the Korean Peninsula.
Absolutely, Ramesh. In just a few weeks from now, North Korea's Kim Jong-un will be meeting US President Donald Trump. All of this, in a way, including the meeting between the two Korean leaders earlier, was where you were present as well to witness that historic moment, has been laying the groundwork for the crucial meeting between the United States leader and the North Korean leader. We are understanding that there will be several points that will remain sticking points when the talks do happen between Trump and Kim.
Indeed. Now, this crucial meeting, the second meeting between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, comes barely a few weeks before Kim Jong-un's much anticipated meeting with Donald Trump, probably in Singapore in the middle of next month. So clearly, it goes to show that China is as involved in the Korean affairs, especially that China cannot be ignored in the affairs on the Korean Peninsula. Remember, he has traveled to China before, and China has also been recently traveled to Pyongyang when the Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Pyongyang meeting with Kim Jong-un and others. So clearly, China remains involved in the affairs of the Korean Peninsula. But that said, the sticking points remain, Molly, the issue of denuclearization, what happens to the American troops stationed on the Korean Peninsula, especially in South Korea. These are all issues which will come up for talks between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump when they meet in Singapore, probably in the middle of next month. Also, the issue of what happens to the American hostages in North Korea. We're given to understand that Kim Jong-un may be willing to release them before, on the run-up to his meeting with Donald Trump. So there are too many moving parts of the story, Molly, between now and the eventual meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. But the mood on the Korean Peninsula is one of optimism, and South Koreans especially look forward to that much hyped meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump when they meet in the middle of next month, probably in Singapore.
Absolutely. We're going to leave it there for the moment, though that is a crucial story that we will keep tracking more on. Reactions that will perhaps trickle in later in the day. Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting his North Korean counterpart. Stay with me, Ramesh, as we'll just try and also unravel further facets of this meeting that's taken place. Just for the benefit of the viewers who might just be tuning in, this is a second meeting that's taken place between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping. The earlier meeting that took place, remember, was also equally surprising. Ramesh, the earlier meeting, of course, was when the meeting was widely spoken of, taking place in absolute secrecy. usually it's only when the train, the green train that the North Korean leaders are known to travel in, made its way into the Chinese, onto the Chinese station platform, is when there was speculation rife that the North Korean leader has indeed arrived in China to visit, to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Do we have further details on the meeting, the second meeting that's taken place this time around?
Well, Molly, one has to understand the North Korea-China relation or the dynamic at play here to understand where these two leaders are coming from. Now, China has considerable economic ties and trade ties with Pyongyang, and China is one of the most important benefactors of the Kim Jong-un regime in Pyongyang. Therefore, China has a leverage over Pyongyang and Kim Jong-un in particular. So China cannot be ignored in this equation as North Korea and South Korea decide to take tentative steps towards peace on the Korean Peninsula. Now, that said, this is only his third visit abroad in the last 8 years, Molly. He came to power in 2011 after the death of his father Kim Jong-un, and since then we've not seen him travel at all anywhere abroad until March this year, when he traveled to Beijing on that slow, long green train, which has become so synonymous with Kim Jong-un. When he and his wife traveled on that train to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping and his wife in Beijing. And then we saw him cross the demilitarized zone and meeting and shake hands with Moon Jae-in not so long ago, in fact, last week in the demilitarized zone in South Korea. And this is his third visit abroad to China again. It only goes to show the importance of China in resolving the affairs of the Korean Peninsula, Molly, that China cannot be ignored. China is and remains a crucial factor, a pivotal role, so to speak, in the affairs of the Korean Peninsula, especially with relation to North Korea. And China will have a say in the affairs of the Korean Peninsula for a long, long time to come.
Indeed. And Ramesh, just taking a cue from what you're saying, there was a concern, at least in several articles that were mentioning the Chinese apprehension of losing influence in a way when it comes to the affairs concerning the Korean Peninsula. Is that a valid concern that's been mooted in the run-up to the meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump?
Absolutely, Molly. Now, many people see the North Korean crisis as a proxy war or a war of proxy influence between the US and China. As Donald Trump continues to engage North Korea directly, the greater the chances are of China being sidelined in all of this equation. But China remains involved as ever in the affairs, in running the affairs in the Korean Peninsula. And that, to my mind, is seen a significant message ahead of the Kim Jong-un Trump talks, probably in Singapore in the middle of next month. Because remember, North Korea says that denuclearization is welcome, but then it should be applied uniformly and universally across the Korean Peninsula, including that means that American troops stationed in the Korean Peninsula may have to be relocated, and that all the missile systems placed on the South Korean side of the border may also have to be relocated. So these are all issues which will come up for discussion between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump when they eventually meet in the middle of next month. Any resolution of the Korean Peninsula, Molly, will have to have all three players on board: China, North Korea and the US. Why? Because the armistice agreement signed way back in 27th of July 1953 was signed among three parties: China, the US-led UN and North Korea. And therefore, any resolution of the Korean Peninsula will have to have all these three players on board.
And there are also reports coming in suggesting that US President Donald Trump will also be speaking with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in some time from now. Do we have any further details on that front, Ramesh?
Indeed, if it does happen, one should not be entirely surprised by that, Molly. Remember, there are many players involved. There is South Korea, there is North Korea, there is US, there is China, and then there is Japan. In the last few weeks, we've seen many telephone conversations between these leaders, especially between South Korea's President Moon Jae-in and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, between Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump. Remember, Moon Jae-in will visit Washington on the 22nd of this month for talks with Donald Trump. And now we're given to understand that Donald Trump will also have a telephonic conversation with Xi Jinping. So this is exactly how the chessboard is laid out, Molly, that all three players, China, the US and the two Koreas, will be engaging more frequently going forward in order to have any chance of a fruitful discussion or outcome from those high-level talks.
Stay with me, Ramesh. Further details coming in. U.S. President Donald Trump, in fact, has tweeted just moments ago. He says, and I'm quoting from that tweet, "I will be speaking to my friend President Xi of China this morning at 8:30. The primary topics will be trade and this is where good things will happen, and North Korea, where relationships and trust are building." Let me just read that out once again. This is a tweet that's come in from U.S. President Donald Trump. He says in that tweet, and I'm quoting, "I will be speaking to my friend President Xi of China this morning at 8:30. The primary topics of discussion will be trade, where good things will happen, and North Korea, where relationships and trust are building." No, Ramesh, not the first time that the U.S. president has, in as many words, spoken about the trust factor when it comes to the North Korean situation.
Absolutely, Molly, as he tweet there made it so clear that Trump, in every sense of the word, has defied skeptics at home and abroad who did not see any possibility of a rapprochement between Pyongyang and Washington not so long ago. But here we are, just barely weeks ahead of the much-hyped meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And to that extent, he has defied skeptics around the world, and that has given rise to a speculation that probably and possibly Donald Trump, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un might be contenders for the Nobel Peace Prize this year or the year after. So clearly, things are happening at a fast speed on the Korean Peninsula, and that might have implications, good and bad, for countries in the region and beyond.
All right, stay with me. Let's also get in Atul Aneja, who's joining us on the broadcast for more on this. Good evening. Appreciate your speaking with us here on WION. These reports talking about the meeting that's taken place between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Equally surprising as the earlier meeting that took place between the two leaders. What more have we been able to gather of this meeting?
Well, the Korean diplomacy is moving at a very fast pace now, and this is a sequel to the earlier meeting when Kim Jong-un had come to China. You see, the China-Korean relationship was reset during that meeting which took place in Beijing. And now this is a follow-up. So if the North Koreans have to say something or want to build the foundation for the dialogue with Donald Trump, that is Kim Jong-un's dialogue with Donald Trump, I think it will be rooted through China. And China will be sort of a bridge between the North Korean leader and Donald Trump. It's hard to say what exactly would have been spoken between these two leaders, that is Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. But really one has to get into a middle ground that if North Korea has to denuclearize, which would be the maximalist position pushed by the Trump administration, then there has to be something in terms of security guarantees, etc., coming from China to North Korea. I suppose that these kind of issues would be discussed between Kim Jong-un and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. It's the beginning of the talks, but yet when Kim Jong-un came to Beijing, the statement which was issued by the Chinese side was that North Korea would denuclearize. I think conditions for denuclearization will be something which will have to be worked out before the North Koreans make any commitment.
If I may also ask you, this is a meeting that's taken place in the Dalian city there. If you can elaborate for our viewers, it's the significance of that meeting, some visuals that were also coming in earlier. But this is a stroll, we believe, that the two leaders during which the conversations took place. But this meeting taking place in Dalian city, what more do we make of that?
Yeah, well, Dalian, one is the geographical proximity, because now you're heading into northeast China, which is getting closer geographically. So one maybe just be the logistics part and all. I still don't know how he traveled from North Korea to Dalian. Was it by train, which is usually the preferred option of the North Korean leaders, including his father, that is Kim Jong-un's father? So it could just be logistics and proximity to North Korea, which would have meant that Dalian becomes the venue for this talk. Historically, Dalian is very important because, you know, Dalian is at Port Arthur. It was the site of the Japan Russo-Japan War of 1905, which the Japanese had won. So, it has a very strong, I've traveled to Dalian a couple of times, very strong historically, with the architecture reflecting both Japanese and Russian, along with the Chinese. Very, very interesting city, and also geographically not far from the Koreas. So I would suppose that these could be some of the reasons. But really, why specifically Dalian? Was this some opportune movement? Was Xi Jinping traveling in that area, according to his earlier schedule? We don't know that as yet. But I suppose that the location is important because of its proximity to North Korea.
Absolutely. Just hold that thought. Also getting in our senior editor, Surya Gangadharan, onto the conversation, who I believe also has a question for you. Atul, go ahead, Surya.
Atul, hi. Just want to check, is this, since we are in the season of informal summits, is this something informal between Xi and Kim, or can we expect something at the end of the day, perhaps a statement of some kind?
You're just spot on. You are just spot on here. Because this is the style after the 19th Party Congress. Because, before the Wuhan meeting took place with Prime Minister Modi, we had this grandstanding kind of occasion when Kim Jong-un came to Beijing. I would not be surprised that this is part of a Chinese style of diplomacy now, which we are seeing after the 19th Party Congress. I would not be surprised that this meeting may be followed for something similar with the Japanese. Li Keqiang, the Chinese Prime Minister, is today in Tokyo for trilateral talks with the South Koreans and the Japanese. And Shinzo Abe is supposed to come, depending on what happens during these talks. And if Abe comes here, I would expect a similar kind of a special treatment given to Mr. Abe, because for China now, because of the pressure coming from the Americans, they are reaching out to the major Asian powers, India being one of them. I think Japan will follow, and the Korean track. So there is an overhang of the American pressure, which seems to be defining a new style of Chinese diplomacy, and we see that in the North Korean case as well.
In fact, there's another question I have, Atul. The other day, the Korean president, South Korean president, had talked of funding north-south rail linkage with a connecting network to China. Exactly what were we seeing here? Is the Chinese pushing this, or is it something else that is playing out here that we can't see?
Yeah, it's extremely significant. Actually, I'm tempted to say that we are seeing a post-U.S. century emerging. Too big a word, but we are seeing some crack up of the earlier strategic structures which are going on. Especially, I'm talking of the South Koreans now. This physical integration with China through the North Korea is something absolutely novel, and I suspect people in the Asia Pacific and in ASEAN are now re-looking and re-examining their earlier structural linkages with the United States and want to, keep all their options open and getting structurally linked more to the Chinese side. And then China then goes forward to Central Asia and to Russia. Frankly, I see the rise of Eurasia here, the potential rise of Eurasia, and the frameworks are changing within which countries in Southeast Asia are looking at the world. It's not the sort of a post-1945 world where you first to the Cold War times, and the post-Cold War you were looking at the unipolar world and trying to connect as strongly as possible to the U.S. But I think in this last 1 or 2 years, especially the last 1 year, we are seeing a sort of that morphing into something new, where you are looking at integrating yourself more with China and then with the Eurasian economies. I think that the trajectory is more towards this side. And in that context, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, which will take place next month in Qingdao, is one of the cogs fitting into this larger framework.
One more point, that the Lowy Institute in Australia has just released this rankings for power in Asia, and they've, of course, America has come out on top, but China is not far behind. India is somewhere, I think, 4th or 5th on the list. And they say by 2030 we are the giants of the future. Interesting play out there?
Absolutely. And when you have this hierarchy, frankly, Surya, I have not seen the Lowy report which you are referring to, but going by what you say, I think this is becoming very important that among, let's say, the first 10, what kind of priorities are each of these countries setting vis-a-vis each other. I really think Wuhan summit is become very, very important, because when I was there, the sense I got was that we have been too long seeing the China-India relationship in a bilateral context, border, etc. But the framework seemed to have changed much more here, because these are sort of statements we usually ignore: the rise of Asia, the rise of Eastern civilization. Now, this is something which Xi Jinping kept saying, and Modi was reacting to that in a similar vein. So perhaps because of the changes which are taking place in the West, frankly, starting with 2008 financial crisis or the economic meltdown or so going on in the West, that countries have now started, re-looking at the world and independently trying to fashion out their own agenda, what suits their national interests. And so the old structure seems to be cracking up, and we should be seeing India, Korea, Japan, and ASEAN as some of the main players in this new shake-up which is taking place.
Indeed, appreciate very much, Atul Aneja, you're joining us on this developing story, a second meeting that's taking place between Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We're going to leave it there for the moment, also thanking Surya Gangadharan and Ramesh Ramachandran for joining us on the broadcast. We're completely out of time in this edition.